All right, folks, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes as people log on. Thank you for attending today's webinar. All right, welcome, folks. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes as people sign into the webinar. All right, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes for people to log in, and then we'll get started. All right, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes for people to trickle on here to the webinar. And Sandy, we can see your Google screen. All right, looks like we're developing a critical mass of attendees. Just going to give it another couple minutes. Just going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll get going. All right, it's a couple minutes after noon time. I hope everyone's looking forward to a nice lunch and learn session today. And thank you for attending the latest webinar in the New York Upstate Chapter virtual conference. My name is Mark Castiglione. I have the honor of being the president of the New York Upstate Chapter, and I'm pleased to be one of our webinar hosts today. I'll be joined by my colleague Sandy Mezowitz to moderate today's session titled User-Centered Zoning Codes. Sandy is a member of the conference committee and has done a tremendous job as the point person to manage all aspects of registration and has set up all the webinars. So she deserves a lot of credit for making the conference possible. So thank you, Sandy, and thank you to the conference committee for pulling together such a great conference under the circumstances this year. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, General Code. General Code has been in business for over 55 years and serves over 3,000 local governments. Check out generalcode.com for more information about our sponsor. Without our partners and sponsors, this virtual conference would not be possible. I also wanted to let you know that all sessions are being recorded and attendees will have access to them via the conference Eventbrite page for a year after the live event happens. All attendees are automatically muted, so if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A box. We will address the questions as they come up, and I will try my best to insert them tactfully and appropriately into the presentation as appropriate. So zoning regulations have become increasingly complex and sometimes difficult for property owners, developers, or really anyone to understand. As professional planners, we all know how impenetrable zoning codes can be, which underscores the challenges that are faced by property owners and others to understand what the rules are. We all know the profession of planning lies at the crossroads of science and art, and more often than not, our challenge is to clearly communicate complex policies or other regulations clearly. Whether we're working with elected officials, stakeholders, or the general public, being focused on our audience is key to effectively communicating, and the same goes with your zoning code. Planners have a host of new data visualization tools, online platforms, and other tools that will enhance our ability to help people digest dense information in better ways. This session will explore how to write and publish user-centered zoning codes that narrow the gap between complex zoning regulations and how they are communicated to the public. And I'm pleased to welcome today's speakers, Tim Schwecke and Wayne Childs. Tim Schwecke manages business operations and product design development and customer relations at Civitech Consulting and Civic Webware. Tim's planning practice article, User-Centered Planning, was published in the February 2020 issue of Planning Magazine. During his 20-year career in community planning, Mr. Schwecke has been involved in a wide variety of projects and specializes in land use regulations and community plans. Wayne Childs serves as the Director of Technical Solutions for General Code, a member of the ICC family of companies. He has spent his time at General Code specializing in developing intelligent ways to meet the unique codification needs of planning, building, and zoning professionals. Wayne has spent most of his 25-year career focused on multimedia and publishing system process and technology development. And I'd like to welcome Wayne and Tim to the presentation today. As a reminder, this CM credit session number is 9205086. Easy enough to find on the APA CM credit website. And also I'd like to remind you that tomorrow's webinar session called Preparing for E-Bikes is at 3 p.m. So be sure to register and attend that session as well. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Tim, who I confirmed this morning is a big Twins fan. Sorry to hear about their early retirement from the playoff series this year. And Wayne, who is from Rochester, and I'm sure enjoys a good Nick Tahoe session as much as the next guy. So Tim and Wayne, take it away.
So Wayne is going to be pulling up the slide deck real quickly. And before we start, going through the slides, I just want to commend Mark. He did a wonderful job in kind of setting the stage. But really, I want to pose a simple question, and that is basically that if cities are adopting land use regulations to promote the public benefit, why is it so hard for the public to figure them out? in our mind, that is a central problem, and hopefully our presentation is going to kind of help reorient how we do planning and how we provide that information to the public. And really, doing that, starts with the resident, the city residents, developers. Those are the audiences that we're speaking to as public officials, and we ought to be doing everything with that in mind. So obviously zoning started a number of years ago. It started out very simple. The regulations weren't that complex. They dealt with bulk standards and use standards. And you have to keep in mind that the regulations that we have today are kind of structured and organized like the ones that were done a century ago. They were written with a typewriter, and they didn't have copy and paste, and they use the tools that they had at the time. But still, we're carrying forward that structure and organization into our current codes, and it's time to kind of rethink how we write our codes in the first place.
Yes, it started out with some pretty noble cause there, and making sure that the equitable building didn't just put everybody else in shadows. But I think things have become a little more complex recently.
So over time, we've been adding, new objectives to zoning codes and new things, and as we've done that, we've just kind of made the bulk of the zoning code much more heavier, as was mentioned. We're making it more complex. We're making it harder to find the information that we're looking for. So we're kind of heading in a good direction with addressing new and different things, but we haven't resolved the underlying problem about the structure of the zoning code in the first place. And obviously, maybe you've seen this before, but the critique is, well, if you want to use a zoning code, you have to have a law degree. And keep in mind that the original zoning codes were written by attorneys, and that kind of influence is still evident today. And that's just something that we need to deal with collectively.
It is, and I'd like to add from the perspective of somebody who does codification for municipalities. There is really today a huge difference in the zoning codes that we see that have the fingerprints of planners on them over those that just have the fingerprints of attorneys on them.
So here's just a real simple graph. Obviously, the number of zoning codes has increased over time, and that's a good thing. And the complexity also has kind of risen. But the problem is, again, we're still dealing with the legacy of how do we, share that information with the public. Again, typewritten, documents, manuscripts. Today we're getting a little bit better. Now there's PDFs, there's online versions. But really, there's a real gap between how we present zoning codes and where the public wants to be in terms of accessing that information, and obviously being able to order a pizza online in 3 clicks has changed that whole dynamic. So there's a technology gap, and it really affects a lot of different people in different ways, but it's a problem that frustrates everybody, from developers and staff to realtors and everybody else.
So the material we'll be covering today really, it addresses 2 significant problems. One is the technology gap that Tim refers to, and the other is the content itself. And we're actually we're gonna focus on both of those because they're equally important in the end solution.
So the real focus again is going to be the resident, and we need to be treating them as customers, just like a business treats their customers. We have to have that same kind of mindset. Everything from our mission statement to the service that we provide and how we do that. We ought to be thinking like a business owner, and reorienting everything that we do around that. So again, this is just kind of, I don't want to say a total new way of doing things or looking at it, but it's kind of reorienting the focus of again, what we do and how we do it. always keeping in mind that our citizens are our customers.
One of the things we see consistently on the codifier side is, when we have a client come to us, and work with our editorial staff, or when they're working in conjunction with a planning consultant or internal planners, the thing that really holds them up and takes a lot of their time is when the users of the code are consistently coming back to them, either completely not understanding the code at all, or being just not able to find their way through the code. So we have a lot of experience in trying to make those connections.
So what we want to do is just kind of walk you through kind of a process that you can use to, kind of reorient how you do things. Perhaps you're a planning department of 1 or 100. The same steps that we're going to be going through certainly apply. And really it starts with the user and about their needs and their expectations.
I think a really important thing that Tim brought up before was thinking like he mentioned retailer, so think like Amazon, think like Main Street retailer, where, this is really about meeting their needs and making things as easy as possible for them.
So obviously the first step in the process is to identify your users. And unlike, somebody who's writing a book for a certain demographic, zoning codes are written by a wide variety of people: residents, realtors, appraisers, developers, business owners, and there's actually different kinds of developers. You might be dealing with a very novice developer, and you might be dealing with a sophisticated developer. So you really need to understand who your end user is, and that way you can kind of focus on their needs and expectations. So again, it's really important that you figure out how different sets of people, constituents, use your zoning code. So the basic thing here to do is to ask them, what are your pain points when you're using our code? What do you find difficult when you're trying to get information? What are the roadblocks? And tell us. And that way you can kind of focus on where they're starting from so that you can meet their needs and expectations. So having that information in the background, you're going to be coming up with ideas that will, hopefully address some of those pain points. And, really it's something that can be done by yourself, or if you're a planning department of more than one, get everybody in the room. Perhaps get some of your elected officials in the room and just brainstorm ideas. How can you do things better? That's what this is all about.
It's really important to consider the different levels here. It's really easy for all of us in our daily work to get caught up in our immediate work groups, but like Tim said, really consider the levels. It can be done at the staff level internally, planning commission, governing body level. It's very important to consider all levels of the people in the roles who can assist you.
So having a full laundry list of things that can be done, really need to step back and think what you're capable of doing. Obviously we all operate with limited resources, time, money, ability, and basically use that kind of as a first filter to kind of create that work plan. In the next slide, before we go on to the next set, just want to talk about again, kind of with a business retailer kind of mindset. Talk about touch points. Essentially, when a business owner is reaching out to people, he considers each of those interactions as a touch point, and city planners need to do the same. So every time that we interact with a member of the public, or they with us, that's a touch point. And what we need to be doing is to be thinking about, how did that touch point go? Was that interaction positive? Was there just kind of a neutral response? And quite honestly, sometimes those touch points can be hostile. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to kind of be aware of our messaging and the delivery of what we do as city planners. And again, you know, those are touch points, and every one of those are very important.
Touch points are absolutely the point in which people make judgments about your city, about your department, about your staff, about your procedures themselves and policies, and they make decisions, you know, in these touch points. For example, sending the exact same letter to abutters regarding a project can result in many different responses. Some of these folks will just throw the letter out. They're not even interested. Others will seek more details and inquire and ask questions and dig. You know, and some will give up when they can't find out what they need. So we want to eliminate those opportunity for negative touch points.
So just some ideas, kind of building off that, the idea about touch points is become aware of what the touch points are, number one, and then just kind of keep track of them over a period of time. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. It could be a month. Just keep track of the number of times people call in, calls you make, emails that you send out, public hearings that you conduct, you know, staff reports that you write, and that way you'll really get a sense for how many, you know, different ways you are interacting with the public and the public with you. We're going to be talking about different, you know, strategies that you might want to do as part of your brainstorming process. And really the intent here is not to, you know, go for the perfect solution, but to actually work on the small things that you can do up front. Sometimes they are the easiest things to do, and they're actually some of the most productive in terms of the return on investment. And really, you know, sometimes we focus on what will help staff, but really the focus is what will help the residents. And that's kind of how we should prioritize some of the things that we've been talking about.
As tedious as it may sound, it's so important to measure those types and the varieties of touch points. I think you'd really be surprised, even if you just do a small sample, you'd really be surprised at how many touch points there are with the public and using the code, and you know, the variety of the types. You know, it's all about keeping the residents front and center versus meeting the needs of, you know, the attorneys or internal officials and employees.
So the second, you know, part of the process that we're talking about is kind of, you know, what do you do with all those ideas? You know, you went through the brainstorming process, you've got a laundry list of, you know, perhaps 20 or 100 different things that you can do. Obviously you can't do everything. So the next things that we're going to be talking about is kind of how you prioritize those things and how you kind of organize some of that content. One of the, you know, perhaps the easiest places to start is to not, you know, work on your zoning code, not to work on anything other than, you know, trying to think about your mission statement. Your mission statement, again, whether you're a department of one or many, is going to drive what you do. And it's going to be your public expression to the public to say, this is what we're all about.
Hey, Tim.
And,
It's Mark. We just had a question in the chat, if you don't mind,
sure.
from Alicia, and she asked, could you suggest some different ways you've measured the different types and number of touch points?
So it's simply, you know, just a listing of all the different ways, again, that you are communicating and the public is communicating with you. Again, you know, just a listing of staff reports, telephone calls, emails, incoming, outgoing, public hearings, public meetings, inquiries that come through the front door, how many people are coming in and asking questions, or you know, I mean, just the full range of you know, touch points. And basically you start with the list, and throughout the week or the month, you're going to be adding to that list and keeping track of it. So again, you know, that's just a real simple way, again, of becoming aware of what a touch point is in the first place, and then finding out how many and what type they are.
I would say definitely from our perspective in working with people in different roles in municipalities, I would say keep really open-minded and aware of what roles, within your own municipality are dealing with zoning code in some form. We've had separate conversations at times with people in, code enforcement, zoning administrators, planners, clerks, people who receive phone calls. Sometimes it's really surprising to see the number of different people and where those phone calls are coming in from the community. And that in itself is it's an insight to tell you that folks don't really know the appropriate people to reach out to when they have a question or concern.
Okay. Go to the next slide. Wayne.
Yes, we moved to the next slide. We were here, now we're here.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. So again, what you're wanting to do is to take those brainstormed ideas and organize them. And one way of doing that is to kind of put them into different buckets in terms of the level of effort. And one way of doing that is to simply say we're going to be tweaking this, or we're going to be rebooting and making moderate changes, or the next bucket of ideas can be reinventing. So there's a scale of ideas, again, that range from very simple to more effort.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the way that Tim laid this out, where you can, if you've run into some roadblocks or some slowdowns, you can choose to pick off those smaller, lower effort projects. Or if you have enough momentum behind you and you have enough support, you can go with the higher, the higher effort projects.
And the other way of looking at all your ideas that came out of the brainstorming is to put them into two categories. The first, focuses on the code itself. What does the code say and how does it say it? Again, on the left-hand side, we've got different categories. You can reinvent. You can say, our code is so bad, we're just going to rewrite our entire zoning code. On the other extreme, you might want to just do minor amendments. And obviously the time, effort, and the time to benefit of your work is going to be totally different. It could take you, 2 years to, reinvent and rewrite your zoning code. But over a period of months, you can make minor amendments to your code that can solve problems, much quicker. And it's going to be up to you and your resources, again, how you kind of categorize and prioritize things. But the next set of ideas would kind of correlate back to the service delivery of your zoning code. Okay, I need to jump back to this slide. I'm sorry, Wayne, the next one. I was getting ahead of myself. So, with regard to a zoning code, obviously the real trend now is to have lots of illustrations, lots of tables, lots of, photographs perhaps. And one way of kind of doing that is to, reorganize how you do your zoning code. Again, we're living with a legacy of attorneys drafting zoning codes on a typewriter, and now we're not limited by that.
So this has definitely been the area where, in over 55 years, we've seen the greatest change in hosting over 3,000 codes across the country. We sit in a place where we're able to see lots of different approaches to zoning codes. And this change is huge. This shift away from, the legalese, the text heavy copy that just doesn't engage people. And, like we said earlier, you have to keep in mind the many different users, people who don't use codes every day. I encourage everybody to think about the people who really need to understand zoning code in something that, involves their property or their businesses or their community. Think about those people first, about those people who just don't pick up the code book. Many of us are very close to this work every day. Think about those people who are not in those code books every day.
So in terms of organizing, you know, your zoning codes, if you go to the next slide, I believe. Okay. So one way of you know, again, organizing all your brainstorm ideas is to think about the code. The second is to think about the service delivery, you know, how you share the code, how you know, deliver it out. It's basically different kinds of service delivery. You can be looking at inbound and outbound communications. In the slide, there are some different ideas, again, based on, you know, the level of effort that you want to do. And these are just ideas to kind of help you kind of, you know, brainstorm further. Again, you know, just minor things can go a long way in terms of inbound and outbound communications.
Yeah, I don't think we can stress enough the importance of the two-way communication. We're generally really good if we're in the code development or code publishing process of doing the outbound communications, but let's consider the inbound communications. Let's consider, how do users, you know, if they do have questions, how do they inquire? How do they complete forms? How do they return the information that they need to return to proceed on a project? It's very, very important, and in my experience, I believe it tends to be overlooked, and we really need to spend more time on that.
So the next category is obviously your internal systems and policies. You know, obviously, you know, the citizens won't see behind the scenes kind of, you know, processes and things that you do, but how you kind of, you know, implement these is going to have a direct benefit back to the end user. Again, you know, it's basically, you know, how can you make things simpler for the end user? And again, that might be a simple, you know, policy change internally. You know, how you do certain things. How can you change the workflow to make things go a little bit easier in terms of permitting? So internal systems and policies are very important.
So something I'd encourage everybody to look at is not only the written or the official policies and procedures of departments or municipalities, but also consider the unwritten behaviors and policies. It's very important to have your antenna up for those and look for, you know, those norms, or like I said, those unwritten procedures and policies. Those tend to come out through either the code rewrite process or the code updating process. We find those a lot when we're dealing with people in different positions within the same municipality.
And then also, you know, obviously think about the public input and engagement. I mean, how are you involving the public with, you know, public hearings? You know, public hearings, you know, tend to be, you know, required, but how we do the public hearings is very important. I mean, how do we come across in that public hearing? Again, you know, just simple things that can be done, you know, in terms of your procedures. You know, maybe think about kind of eliminating some of the unnecessary steps, you know, perhaps giving more authority to staff so that they can make those, you know, non-substantive kind of reviews and approvals, rather than going through the public hearing process, rather than going to the plan commission. Again, the intent is to achieve your objectives, but do it in the simplest way possible.
As a member of a planning board, one thing that is paramount to me and most of the members on the board is to include involuntary participants. So not only the people who are appearing before you or are part of the process are engaged in the process, but we need to consider everybody, even the involuntary people, because everybody in your community is affected by the zoning.
So the other, you know, set of ideas that you might come up with might relate to the transactional kinds of things that have to be done. So people are going to your zoning code, they're finding out information. And then the next question is, well, how do I move ahead with my project? And, you know, making that step to, applying and tracking your application through the process, that's just as important as having a well-written zoning code. Obviously, the real emphasis now is going online, which it should be, so that people can, submit their application online. They should be able to pay for it online. They should be able to, track it online. And there's a whole host of permitting platforms that are out there. But don't let that in and of itself drive your whole effort, because that will, eat up a lot of your time. And, quite honestly, some of those permitting platforms are very expensive, but you can do, again, simpler things that have just a great impact, again, on the end user, making it easier for them to comply in the first place. Wayne, you want to touch on this one?
Sure. Considering the best practices for presenting your zoning code to the end users, plan early on how the zoning code is going to be published in Access. So be sure you're talking to your clerk, your city secretary, whoever deals with, whether you use a codifier or you host your ordinances on your municipal website, whoever's responsible for putting that zoning code out there to the public to use, make sure you talk to them well in advance. If you've included things like, illustrations, graphics, things that could affect the publishing process, have conversations early and often, discuss budget. Like Tim just said, there's some great platforms for permitting. There's also great platforms for presenting zoning codes in new ways that really communicate modern zoning codes much better than the old the old legalese that we've spoken of, the text heavy or text only approaches. So
we had a question, and this is a contextual thing that I think is related to the discussion of platforms, and it's from Laura, and she asks, do you have suggestions for rural communities where internet access might be an issue?
Yes, currently you have most of this is in print. I mean, if you don't have, we're familiar with a lot of rural communities that are, are seeking out grants, as far as grants to improve broadband in their communities or internet access, at all. So I know there's the grant process. You may have to get involved in this because you could have this wonderful vision for your community, but if you can't communicate it to the public, that's a problem. In the meantime, obviously you can have that in print form. You may seek to, we've seen communities like this create pamphlets, if you will. So smaller sections, not entire code books, but you may be able to produce smaller print copies that you can distribute to interested parties if you don't have any connectivity at all.
Thanks, Wayne.
So early on, we were talking about, ideas for the code, how you can make the code better. And again, there's any number of ways you can organize, content in a zoning code. But what you want to do, again, is think about the audience. If you're a writer, you're writing a book for a specific audience. And again, what you're doing with a zoning code is you're trying to organize the content. You're trying to convey the content in such a way that people can pick up a code book, whether it's, printed or online, and find the information that they're looking for. And quite often when you look at zoning codes, typically what happens is you kind of put, kind of the unimportant things in the appendix, okay? One way of kind of, doing that different is to put the most important part of the zoning code in the appendix. Obviously there has to be a lot of legal language and so on and so forth, and you can organize that and put it in the main chapters. But if you're, working with a citizen, you can, basically tell them, focus on Appendix A, B, C, and D. And one way of doing that is to, use a use table. Rather than having a listing for each of the different zoning districts of all the permitted uses, you can organize that and put it into a use table. And that simply, answers the questions, what can I do on my property, by going down the column, or where can I put my business by going across. So the land uses are listed on the left-hand side, and then it basically shows, the different procedures and the requirements to get approval. And this is probably one of the simplest ways, I think, of, taking an old legacy zoning code, putting it into a table like this. You're not changing content, you're not changing the requirements, but you're simply reorganizing the content so it's easier to find. So use tables, are up and coming. A good portion of the communities that, have a use table, but if you don't, really think about organizing your content with a use table. So that's Appendix A.
Yes, if I could just add, from the codifier's perspective, Tim, this is the biggest slam dunk, easiest improvement you can make as far as offering faster and easier access to zoning information within a code.
So the next set of information can be put into Appendix B, and essentially what you're doing is focusing on the use. Okay, so within a typical zoning code, you're going to have a section of definitions for, general definitions, and then land uses. In this kind of organization, I mean, why not put that definition with the use? And then you can have a listing of where that use is allowed, either by right or as a conditional use. And then you can also pull in the parking requirements. Currently a lot of zoning codes, they have a chapter on parking. And then they have parking requirements for each of the different land uses. And then again, you're having to flip back and forth and so on and so forth between the different districts and parking requirements. So why not put that in tandem with all of the different land uses in a single place? The next, category of information that you can include in this kind of structure is to include all of the supplemental standards. So in just a single page, you can find out all the different land uses. You can find out how they're described, where they're allowed, what the requirements are for parking, and other supplemental standards. So that's the second part. That's Appendix B. And then Appendix C is a listing of all the dimensional standards. And here you would organize by district, and this is where you would list those things, or how things are counted. And then if you're able to, then you can have a diagram that kind of shows those different dimensional standards, how they apply, and where they're located. Again, this is typically taking your existing content and organizing it like this. And the intent, again, is to structure it so that people can find the information easily. And the fourth piece, Appendix D, family or multifamily or commercial or industrial. Here again, you can put together a graphic that shows where those standards are applied and what the standard is. And the intent here is to structure things so that you can take all your information that you have and put it into this format so that people can answer the questions that they have. And typically, this kind of organization will answer 80% of the questions that people will have by going to Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C, and if you have, Appendix D. And that way they know exactly what they can do, where they can do it, and what the procedures are to move ahead.
Having the luxury of seeing thousands of different user experiences with different zoning codes, We can't stress enough that using these illustrations in the tables that Tim just showed you, illustrations with call outs and tabular information, is probably the greatest improvements consistently that we see across zoning codes in municipal codes.
So again, what you want to do is to be able to structure your zoning code to answer 80% of the questions that people have. And if you think about it, there's basically two types of questions. The one is, what can I do with my property? And the next one is, where can I put my business? And that's really the focus here. So basically now we're kind of wrapping things up in terms of what do you do, once you have your things, lined up in terms of your priorities. Basically it's all about implementation. The other thing is to, when you're trying to map out a strategy, try and be measurable objectives, so that you can, see if you're hitting the mark or not. Here are some, simple, goals that you might want to think about. A person should be able to find the information that they're looking for in less than an hour, okay, and then apply for the application. People should be able to find the zoning details in 5 minutes or less without calling staff. A person should be able to find out where they can do their business with a matter of 3 clicks or less. So those things are targets. Obviously, you're not going to achieve them right away, perhaps, but they're intended to, share, with your staff, with the public, how you're doing, and what you feel is really important in achieving your mission.
Hey, Tim, we had another question come in, and it relates to document design. Now, you had suggested, putting the A, B, C, and D in the appendix, but the question relates to, do those graphics and tables have to go in the appendix, or can they be put right into the code itself?
Well, obviously the appendix is part of the zoning code, okay? And you might have a whole host of different, graphics and, illustrations, and when appropriate, they can go in different parts of the code, but basically, you're thinking about how people are going to be thinking about the code, where they go, and what information that they're looking for. If it makes sense to put it in an appendix or some kind of organization like that, then that's what you would do. There's no right or wrong answer in terms of how you organize your code. But again, having the thought process of a user picking up the document for the first time would be a really good starting point for any kind of project like this.
As a codifier, I'd like to suggest, earlier in our presentation, we talked about low-hanging fruit and get started on smaller projects. Using the appendix approach, I believe from a codifier's perspective, is a way that you could actually make this happen faster and give tools to your code users in a much quicker way than embedding those. I would consider, if you started embedding those types, that turns more into the code rewrite, or one of those, the higher level, which may be appropriate for your community. It's just a different approach, just like Tim said.
So obviously, implementation is everything. And basically, you need to kind of, set the expectations of what your department is trying to accomplish, and share that with the public. Obviously, share it with your plan commission, your city council, whomever. There's a lot of resources out there, but obviously starting is the hardest point, and the other part is to be able to maintain that. This is a long-term process. It's not something that's going to be done overnight, but day in and day out, think about how you can be doing things better for the benefit of your residents. Obviously, you're going to be doing things, and some of them might, be perfectly, spot on, but you ought to be, always thinking about, yeah, we've done that, but maybe we need to kind of, do it a little bit differently. And also, as you're implementing these things, keep track of your return on investment. Okay, basically that's a business term where you basically are saying that if we spend X dollars, the benefit that we receive is going to be this. And that's one way, again, of trying to prioritize what you do. Do the things that require the least investment, but have the biggest benefit.
ROI estimates may be difficult. They may, and they might not be the most fun thing to do in the world, but it's really going to help you convince others who do not have the insight that you have regarding, the vision you have for your community and what you can achieve through zoning. But those ROI estimates are really going to help win people over and help garner support for your project.
And finally, you're going to be doing great things. Again, you're going to be doing things differently, and you ought to be telling people about it. Just don't assume that everybody knows that you're kind of doing things differently. You ought to be out there front and center saying, this is what we set out to do. This is what we've done to date, and this is what we have to do yet. And you need to be, telling people that over and over again. And you've got different audiences. You've got your elected officials, which are very important, but then you have everybody else, the residents, the developers, and so on and so forth. They need to be hearing how you're, doing things a little bit differently with them in mind. And be proactive about that. Don't assume that if you say it one time, everybody's going to hear it or they understand it. You have to be saying that over and over again in different media and to different targets.
And there are so many silos in government. Sometimes it's easy to overestimate how visible your work is to people in other silos. So again, like Tim says, it's worth putting the time, and targeting those messages to different audiences is crucial. People in different roles have very different perspectives and goals. So it's very important to communicate your vision.
So the whole objective here is to, make things better. In all of this, obviously, the resident is going to be front and center. And, maybe, there's opportunities that you can partner with other jurisdictions. Maybe there's an opportunity to develop, common application forms. There's different solutions that you can work on together, share some costs. And you really need to understand that we're talking about a whole range of different activities that can be done. The people, the process, the technologies. And again, it's all about meeting the expectations of your residents and treat them as your clients. And as you're doing this, keep on measuring your, results, how you're doing, and don't give up. Just keep on going. Progress is slow sometimes, but incrementally over time, people will recognize that, and it's going to be to the benefit of your department, and obviously for the city.
Progress is slow sometimes, but that's what I really like about the format of what Tim produced in those that roadmap. Basically, this process we presented today to start out with that low-hanging fruit. Start out with the lower effort projects that involve fewer groups. I think there was a process put forth today that you can work up through it. You may have big goals or a large amount of work to take on, but you can start in those bite-sized chunks.
So again, the presentation today kind of tracked the article that was published in the Planning Magazine in February 2020. If you're an APA member, you can jump online and access that. And there's also a link at the bottom if you're not an APA member to kind of read the article. And again, it's more of an infographic. It's not very text heavy, but it kind of shows the process, and again, some of the ways that you can organize your information and to create that roadmap for success.
And that will conclude our presentation today. I certainly thank you for your time and your attention. And I know Tim and I would both be more than willing to answer any follow-up questions at this time. And if we run out of time today, we certainly would be happy to talk to you after the presentation. So here's our contact information. Tim, any closing words?
Nope, I'm just able to answer any questions with the timer remaining here.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne and Tim. I thought it was an excellent presentation. We were able to share a direct link to the Planning Magazine and zoning article in the chat for all those interested in reading it. I think this was a very informative presentation, particularly to reorient zoning and the practice of zoning administration to be customer service oriented. And, you know, I have a question for you, and I think you guys alluded to it a number of times in the presentation. And that it does relate to customer service, but it also relates to how you generate momentum behind the need to tick off some of these low-hanging fruit projects. So could you guys talk a little bit about framing, you know, particularly messages to your elected officials or others that would need to greenlight, you know, starting these zoning code amendments and these alterations to the code to make it more customer friendly?
You know, quite often a plan commission is going to be relying on staff to, you know, to process applications, to do their staff review. But I also think it's something that the plan commission should be able to pick up their zoning code and be able to answer some basic questions. And that's a good exercise to, you know, to provide the zoning code to the plan commission members and say, okay, you know, tell me where I can put this kind of business. Okay, and they're going to look at their zoning code and they're going to, you know, say, you know, we don't know, we can't figure it out. That's what we have staff for. So basically, you know, running through that exercise will point to them or kind of emphasize, maybe they already know it, that the zoning code is the first starting point. And again, if they're struggling as a plan commission member, what do you think the resident is going to be doing? You know, maybe they intuitively know the problem, but, you know, perhaps going through a process like that is going to really drive it home. And again, you know, obviously what you're trying to do is to create, you know, political, you know, support for maybe doing some of the larger projects, perhaps, you know, budgeting more time and resources to kind of, you know, figure this whole thing out. So, you know, I mean, that's just one example of how you can kind of create some political momentum. But again, you know, there's a whole host of things that you can do that you really don't need to get the okay. If you've got poorly designed, you know, application forms, you know, they're too long, they're too short, they don't, you know, ask the right kind of questions. You know, staff can do that internally without a big, you know, process.
Great. I think that's helpful clarification. We have a number of questions that also came in. The first one is, how would you approach public engagement on a rezoning project in a community with a very large percentage of residential rental property and apartment complexes? You know, the goal obviously being reaching residents who live in the community and have a stake in how it looks and feels.
So obviously, you know, that's going to be a code rewrite. And, you know, quite honestly, you know, obviously you're going to have, you know, public workshops, you're going to have, you know, work sessions with your plan commission, but reaching, you know, the individual property owners is going to be very difficult because it's just not something on the top of the radar for most people. You know, people kind of focus on public engagement for the vision document, you know, the comprehensive plan. But when it comes down to the land use regulations, it's you know, quite honestly much more difficult to, you know, really, you know, inform the public on how this really affects all the different properties. So I mean, it's a challenge. You know, I'm not sure there's a single bullet to kind of fix it. But again, you know, just reaching out in multiple ways. You know, having a resource where people can click on their parcel, you know, online to figure out how the new zoning code will affect them is probably one of the biggest things and easiest things that you can do to say, here's our proposed zoning code, this is how it affects your property individually, and provide that, you know, interactive map so that they can see the changes.
I would definitely second that. And one of the things that I see is, you know, across many different codes is many codes don't even contain a static map. never mind an interactive map, but a static map. Just increasing the number of tools that are available for people to access information other than just heavy globs of text, illustrations, those interactive map, like Tim says. If you have that tool, in place, when you undergo a rezoning, you can use a tool like that to help communicate the vision and what's changing. So the more tools you have at your disposal to share information, it's that thinking about how is this information shared. It's not simply a book that is sitting up on a shelf somewhere.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have a couple more questions. 2 questions from Ben. Do you have any experience using or developing interactive map-based zoning lookup tools? Is the first question. And the second question, which could be related, is that the next phase of user-friendly zoning code development, that kind of technology?
So you can have the best written code. You can have the best written code in terms of organization, lots of graphics, and so on and so forth. But if you're not sharing that in an interactive online experience, you're better off, but only incrementally so. So the real end goal is to, treat a zoning code like a person ordering a pizza. Okay, you should be able to click on your parcel and find out what the development standards are, what land uses can occur there. And the benchmark that you ought to be thinking about is when people jump online, they should be able to find that kind of information, that level of general information and details in a matter of 3 or 4 clicks. Okay. So having said that, I've written, any number of zoning codes, and basically what I saw was a lack of being able to share that. So what we did collectively and individually is we created a platform that is map-based, that takes, the basic elements of a zoning code, puts it online so that you can answer 80% of the questions that people have. And basically that's what our company does.
A significant percentage of our population has grown up using digital devices to access information. They don't know any other way to access information. We have to be prepared for that, and part of that is is interactive tools online, accessing information digitally. We have to take care of those users.
I think that's helpful. Although we still do encounter some municipalities where the only copy of the code is in the clerk's office, and they have to copy it for you and they'll charge you 10 cents a copy for each page of the zoning code. But anyway, this session was very informative. We're at 1 hour, so I'd just like to again thank Tim and Wayne, our speakers, for a very informative presentation. I'd like to remind all of our attendees that a recording of this webinar and all the webinars in the conference series will be available on the conference Eventbrite page for a year after this presentation, available to secure credit, or if you want to review the sessions afterwards to glean some more information that you may have missed, they will be available there. I'd also like to remind everyone of tomorrow's session on e-bikes at 3 p.m. And looking forward to everyone having a great rest of your conference. Thanks again, Wayne. Thanks again, Tim. And thank you to our sponsor, General Code. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.